This week I'm joined by Ruben Van Luijk. We discuss his book Children of Lucifer, The Origins of Modern Religious Satanism. Our discussion revolves around Satanism, Christianity and modern spiritual belief. If you wish to support Hermetics Podcast, please find our Patreon, merchandise and donation links in the description below. Please enjoy. Ruben Van Luijk, thanks very much for coming onto Hermetics Podcast.
My pleasure.
So before we begin, just a little bit about your... So the book we're discussing, Children of Lucifer, Origins of Modern Religious Satanism, is this your only book which has been published in English?
Yes. It's,
but you're a novelist in Dutch.
Yes, but not a very famous novelist. I'm afraid to say.
What kind of themes and topics do your novels cover?
My novels were mostly very personal, like autobiographical. What you call memoirs in America, I think. And I also wrote a little book about things that made me happy in life. That was a nice thing to write.
Why not?
To try to translate this in English, maybe.
How come the book on happiness wasn't a nice thing to write?
It was a very nice thing to write. Sorry if I was unclear.
Okay. Yeah, just a little bit about your background.
The Children of Lucifer was, of course, part of the result, I must say, of my PhD studies here in the Netherlands, which I extended into this book. I guess you really want to know why somebody would decide to write so extensively, to research something like Satanism so extensively. Is this right? This is what you want to know. Right? Yeah. Okay. Well, I could give three possible answers to this question, actually, and they're all true. The first answer would be it was actually the result of some kind of joke, because I was like a record student, and I was looking for a job, and I said to myself, maybe I can do a PhD. So I approached this professor of religious history, of church history, actually. And she said to me, well, okay, just give me a few proposals. So I wrote down 5 proposals, some of them quite nice, like the history of the exegesis of the Song of Songs. And I also put in history of Satanism. And I already wrote in this proposal, but you will probably not dare to do this. But like always happened, this was the only proposal she really liked at first sight. So we went along with this proposal. She accepted this proposal and got the position for this proposal, and suddenly I was like 7 years studying the history of Satanism. So this is the first answer on your question. But of course, the reason I mentioned the history of Satanism in this proposal, even if it was partly jocular, was because I had the feeling that this history had not been written properly yet, but only in a partial way, only mostly in a negative way, actually, or in a very incomplete way. And as soon as I really started doing research into Satanism, I discovered one of the earlier books of Massimo Introvigne, which is quite decent, I must say very good, and mostly impartial history of Satanism. So I didn't know this yet, but still, even though there were some books, there certainly was space for another take on the subject, for a more orthodox take on the subject. So this was another reason for delving into this subject. And the third answer would be the real personal answer. I thought, because of my personal background, I thought I would be able to, well, maybe not identify, but understand why people would choose to adopt Satanism in which form whatsoever. Because I have a background as a Christian, a fairly Orthodox Christian, I must say. I was like in Bible. I went to church every Sunday until I was like 25. Did Bible study groups, etc., etc. And well, at a certain point, I decided to leave this behind. But there was this strange period in between where I felt like, well, I cannot follow Christ, I cannot follow God anymore. So the logical option would be maybe to choose the side of the devil. So I did not become a Satanist myself. I'm not a Satanist myself. Let's make this clear right away. But I felt I could understand something of the motives which could motivate somebody to become a Satanist. So that was the more personal reason.
And
does it answer your question?
Yeah, and you currently work as a professor, I believe I saw.
No, we can discuss it later if you wish, but I'm not doing academic research anymore. But I'm working as, in English we would call this a professor. I'm actually teaching Dutch in Poland now.
Ah.
So I'm being strictly didactic and not doing research anymore, actually.
Okay. Do you mind if I ask, during writing the book, did you find yourself getting drawn back to your early sort of Christian beliefs at all?
Well, if you mean by this that I reconsidered becoming a Christian, the answer is no, not at all. Actually, well, I discovered a lot of things by doing this research, but one of the things that was kind of new for me was actually the tradition we have in the West, in Europe, of saying, of abandoning Christianity, actually, because for me it was a new experience when I was 25, 26 to leave Christianity, but for European civilization, of course, it was a story done a long time before already. And as, for instance, the Romantic Satanists, which are maybe my most favorite topic within the history of Satanism. Well, it was for me like, okay, they did all these things 200 years ago already. So what's new for me is already like past history for the West.
Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting. And the other thing was, it was more of a challenge for me to identify with the Christian side of the story. For instance, in the 19th century, when the Roman Catholic Church has some kind of a media offensive where they use Satanism to black paint Freemasons. And I really wanted to understand their side of the story too, as far as we can, of course. What their motivation is, and not only understand it in a clinical way, but that you can feel a bit why they made the decisions they made, because I think this is the true purpose of history. And well, in the end, my Christian background was a bit helpful for this, I must say. So in this case, yes, I relived some of my Christianity. Well, I think this talk is going to be about Satanism, but inevitably we're going to be talking about Christianity probably as much as about Satanism, because I think we will see these things, Christianity and Satanism, they are closely related things in weird ways.
Yeah. So before we jump into questions specifically about the book, I do have to ask you the Hermetics question, which is if you could place 3 thinkers, living or dead, into a room and listen in on the conversation, which 3 would you pick?
Yeah, what a question. Well, actually, I would be most curious. I don't know if it qualifies as a thinker, but I would like to hear Van Beethoven speak, Ludwig van Beethoven, because I'm just always amazed by the emotional power of his music. And well, you said three, so maybe we could place Mozart and Schubert. I think this would technically be possible, even that this conversation occurred. Although Schubert might have been still an infant when Mozart was around. Actually, I don't know why I want to listen to them, because I like music, but I'm not. I don't know any technical things about music, so I probably wouldn't be able to follow anything of it, but just to hear them speak. Yeah.
Okay.
And if we're talking, if we're talking about more into this subject, it would be great if we could be like a fly on the wall with. Well, maybe I must explain beforehand. Like Aleister Crowley once had a dinner conversation. He went to have dinner with Montague Summers, yes. And if you, I gather you know who Aleister Crowley is. It's British satirist who called himself the Beast. And Montague Summers was like maverick cleric writing about Satanism, and completely anti-Satanist in his writings, at least. But they actually met, and they had dinner together, and it would be really fun to, I think, to listen to their conversation. So might be a very English conversation too.
Yeah.
Like two British eccentrics speaking to each other. Yeah.
I'm not sure how kind of quaint it would be, quaint and British with Crowley. I could never really put my finger on what he was like as a sort of personality. It's quite a strange one.
No, but he actually noted down in his diary that he had like a pleasant conversation with Summers. So must have been lovely. Yeah.
Okay, so that's a new answer to the question. Normally we have people with thinkers, but I'm happy, composers and musicians. The option to listen to Beethoven, Schubert, and Mozart's music firsthand is that's a great answer.
Like thinkers, mostly they wrote down what they felt, and I think that's mostly the better way to understand what they think than when they would be talking. So. Yeah,
it's a very good point.
Well, this is my opinion.
Okay. Okay, maybe it will sort of arise why you sort of went towards the music there later on, but we'll see. So the first question here is, it's made clear very early on in the book, Children of Lucifer, that Satanism is used over and over and over again. As soon as it's sort of born and evolved in history, it's used over and over again as an attack on anyone's enemy, on anyone's rival. And it's even used today. People will call other people demonic or satanic or evil, which all sort of relates back to Satanism as sort of the origin of this. And do you think this is an understanding where, especially in the West, that we're still largely Christian, because we're always using this? We'll call someone Satan or devil worshipper as an attack, and you actually list sort of almost kind of 100 names, famous names, who've all been attacked on this premise. Do you think that we still have a Christian sort of underlying culture then?
Well, it's a big question. I think yes. There's the basic fact that in the West we are still nominally a majority Christian people to start with. So of course we are still Christian in many aspects, a Christian civilization, you could say. But it's not only this. I think there's like his name Satan is it's become part of our mythology, and of course it derives from the Judeo-Christian background. But it has like a autonomous status mostly. People, when you say Satan, people get a certain image. people know what you mean. I must point out, however, that's not only a negative thing. It's used negative, but there's also like I know on the internet you can use these emoticons, and there's also this emoticon of a smiley with horns, so to make it a little devil, and that also means something like mischief in a good way, like in a desirable way. So there's also this other image of Satan in our society, of course. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily only Christian people would use this mythological aura that's about this Satanism and Satan. I think it's part of our cultural genetics.
So you think that this sort of understanding of evil has always been there?
Well, you were actually talking about two different things here, because there's evil as like an ontological or philosophical category, and there's Satan, who is like a symbolic or mythical figure. So in the Western tradition, of course, Satan has mostly been understood as representative of evil, but that's not the only way we can understand him, or we have understood him. So that has been the dominant way to understand him. Of course, thanks to Christianity, but not only in Christianity. And that's what still makes this Satanism branding so powerful, I think. So, in the end, yes, it's a Christian heritage, to answer your question.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned a lot about it being, there's a whole chapter on Satan as this Christian invention, and it evolves from Christian thought. But you also make it clear that sort of prior to this, the notion of a demon was seen in a sort of a different light. So Socrates, he noted that he had a daemon in his mind, and then this idea of a demon is changed when Christianity comes along. So do you see the invention of the invention of Satan as Christians see it, does that alter demons and that whole area into they sort of form evil?
No, I don't think this. There are a few different things that come together here, actually. If you think of the opposition, the contradiction of evil and good, you have, for instance, Zoroastrianism. I never can pronounce this right. Zoroastrianism, yes, but already has a much more dualist outlook, actually, than Christianity or Judaism has, and a much more stronger division into good and evil in cosmic, in the cosmos as we know it. So this idea of absolute evil, it's not exclusively Christian. Well, this is a very big question, of course. Is this an idea that is universal? Do we all have this kind of idea somewhere that we can imagine, or not imagine, but still have this concept of absolute evil or not? I don't know. That's a big question. It would be nice that somebody wrote a nice, thorough, and not too long book on this, actually. And about these demons, there's something else has changed with Christianity, and that's it doesn't really acknowledge a neutral ground, and that's why these demons actually, in the end, have to get assigned a place, either good or evil. But of course, when we speak of Christianity, it's important to point out Christianity is a very large religion, still the largest religion in the world as we are speaking, with many different strands of thought. Not all Christian thinkers have found its way. There were also fathers of the church who conceived of neutral demons, actually, some sort of supernatural beings that, were not angels, but were not devils either. So there was different kinds of thought of this in the early Christian tradition, and as we know, Origen even thought that in the end the devil would be converted and become like a good angel again. But in the end, it evolved more and more into a very stark dichotomy between like the evil demons and the good angels, and that this word demon was adopted to denote evil spirits. It was partly, of course, a linguistic coincidence. But for like a demon that Socrates describes, well, that would be a problem for the Christian theologians. Either it was like the Holy Spirit inspiring Socrates, or it could only be like a demon in the Christian sense, a devil actually. So to answer your question, I don't think Christianity invented the concept of absolute evil, and it might be, well, like a universal human answer on certain things. In reality, we don't seem to be able to conceptualize in a way that is really sufficient. Reality seems to be ungraspable. We cannot grasp it with the concept we have as humans. And one of the attempts to do this is good and evil. And as such, I don't think it's really a Christian invention. But this is a very interesting question, a very big question. Another thing what's important to note, however, is, and this is deeply related to this history of Satan, is that what Christianity did maybe introduce is its claim on universal truth. Christianity was the truth about the world for everybody. Most earlier religions didn't think so explicit in this way, as far as I know. Like Roman paganism was for the Romans actually, and when they encountered other religions, like Egyptian religion, they tried to assimilate this to Roman religion by, calling Horus, I don't know which Roman god by equivalating these gods. And of course, one religion could be better than the other, and the religion of your own religion was always the best. But that was shown by conquering other people, so to show your god was more strong than the other gods, and not so much by reasoning. This is a true picture of the universe. I don't think people were really thinking about this, and much less about the idea of you have to adopt this picture of the universe to get saved, to become fully human, to find grace. This is an alien idea for most religions prior to Christianity, I think. So this was new, and in the end, this devolved into the idea that everybody should be made Christian, and everything should be made Christian, and everything that was not Christian should be eradicated. And that has been, part of the history I've described in the book. And, kind of a logical thing coming out of this, evolving in history, was that everybody worshipping other gods was actually worshipping demons, or was actually serving Satan. So there's my kind of sense to say they were Satanists from the Christian point of view.
Mm-hmm. So, from the Christian point of view, everything which is external to a sort of very pious form of Christianity is satanic. Anything which is out to, like you said, there's no neutral ground. So anything which is outside of it is almost out to get it. Which is sort of one of the other questions that I have here. Something else you mentioned is sort of, it seems that in that way Satanism as a term is then used sort of as a way to control things. You know, anything that's against the grain is labelled as sort of bad thing, as demonic or satanic. And it seems that in that way, like I said, it's a means to control people.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's true. It's a way to control people in different ways. But there's another dimension involved, of course, which is hard for us. I don't know you so well, but will be hard for most of us now to really feel, to really understand, is that it was not just like symbolism being wielded or something. They believed in the reality of Satan. So imagine for yourself, like Adolf Hitler would still exist, and well, that's like our symbol for evil in the secular West, I think. He still exists, and he's dangerous, and well, your neighbor might or might not be a follower of him, but you know there are followers of him everywhere. Well, then, well, your natural decision would be, of course, to try to oppose this, this secret conspiracy of people trying to bring Nazism to your country, wouldn't it? That's a bit the world's view of like Christianity during, for instance, the witchcraft persecutions.
Mm-hmm.
There was this conspiracy going on, and there was really Satan, who, like a very powerful, supernatural but real adversary of everything what was good, of God, of the church. So there was some urgency. It was not just like a plan for let's control society by propaganda, and we use this Satan because he's a powerful symbol. They felt he was real, and that Satanism was real in the way they depicted it in their propaganda. So that's a way of thinking we cannot really feel anymore. We cannot really follow. Even most Christians would find it difficult, I think, here in the West at least.
Mm-hmm. And do you think it was the era of the Enlightenment which started to dampen that sort of real belief in demons and the devil?
Yeah, certainly. That is, of course, there's much discussion when does this Enlightenment start? I think the early Enlightenment now already starts like in the 17th, even the 16th century. The Renaissance could be seen as a precursor for this. So the skepticism was also very early there. One of the theories, actually, that, well, these persecutions, these religious persecutions became so, all-encompassing. They dominated society in such a way that people couldn't believe anymore that, well, the neighbors that they did business with yesterday, maybe, that they were a part of a satanic ploy, and that the absurdity of it all just became too much. And that might be one of the reasons the early Enlightenment actually started. So that there's more than one way to see the relationship, because the Enlightenment, of course, was very, and if you read Voltaire or Diderot, it's much about the church persecutions and the absurdity of persecuting witches or even people of other faiths. So this was a big theme for the Enlightenment, actually. So it was a reaction on this, what we would now call intolerance, and also an intellectual demolishing, especially, well, the questions you sent me, you said the Enlightenment attempted to exercise Satanism as a ridiculous idea, but actually they didn't attempt to to exercise Satanism. I said because Satanism was already a step too far. They exercised Satan as a ontological reality. And then the idea that there was a conspiracy of people worshipping Satan became absurd in itself. So Satanism in this way, Satanism in this form, was just they didn't bother with this. Actually, it was too ridiculous for them. But of course, the Enlightenment had its own form of very British Satanism, like the Hellfire Clubs, who could be considered as. There's much discussion if they were actually Satanists at all, but there was some ridiculization of Christianity going on. So this was like an enlightened form of Satanism, you could say.
What were the Hellfire Clubs?
The Hellfire Clubs. Okay, maybe good to explain. These were the Enlightenment was also like the era of clubs and coffee house discussions, and there were many clubs, especially in Britain. There was a club for people who had been traveling to Turkey, for instance. Somewhere in Scotland there must have been a masturbation club. And there were also the Hellfire Clubs, which were sort of clubs by gentlemen, making rackets and making fun of Christianity, it seems. We only know about their activities mostly because of what other people wrote about them. So we're not sure what their actually activities were, but it seems all to be some sort of spoof, actually. And the most famous Hellfire Club was never actually called Hellfire Club. It was the Order of St. Francis by Deswood, and it seemed to be a kind of gentleman club for entertaining women in a sexual way, I mean. And some myths became attached to this Order of St. Francis that they were actually worshipping Satan, but there's no actually proof for this. So these were the Hellfire Clubs in 18th century Britain, and if there was any truth to the rumor about the rumors that they were doing something with Satanism, then this would be an example of Enlightenment Satanism.
Yeah, and this is one of the points you bring up as well early on, which is that what makes a Satanist isn't really what we think it is. It's not truly to do with ritual or practice, but it's more to do with a relationship with that idea. Is that correct?
Yeah, relationship sounds very evangelical to me, actually. But if you mean this just in a neutral sense, how they relate to Satan, then yeah, I think so. This is my opinion, by the way. Other scholars use different definitions of religion also. But I have a very broad definition of religion, and because of that also of Satanism. So for me, I think it's all somewhere quoted on Wikipedia even. I define Satanism as intentional religious veneration of Satan. And I use like a word like veneration on purpose, because it doesn't have to be like worship and traditional sense, somebody kneeling for a statue of Satan, or just like Christians could do before God. Like Levian Satanism, they would never do things like this, probably. And they would not even consider Satan to be real, of course. So, but they have what I call like a religious veneration of Satan, because they use him as a symbol to express their view of the universe. And well, that's broadly speaking my definition of religion. When you adopt a set of symbols to express your view of the universe in a consistent way.
Mm-hmm. So, if after the Enlightenment it seems that they were trying to, in their skeptical manner, get rid of Christianity, get rid of belief in favor of reason and logic, in what way does Satanism remain if its big antagonist, Christianity, is sort of taken a bit of a blow by the Enlightenment and, of course, Nietzsche's Death of God. But it seems that the Satanist aspect is still quite prevalent in culture. Why do you think it's stayed around?
I must ask you what you mean with this Satanist aspect. Do you mean actual practitioners of Satanism?
I think the cultural phenomenon, because I think it's sort of culturally understood in the West. Like, everyone understands in a vague way what we mean when we say that.
Well, that's referring to your earlier question about the legacy of Christianity. Yes, I think that the two defining things of our, at least of our, let's say, cultural history are the adoption of Christianity and the presence of Christianity still in our culture, and the fact that, well, let's say the vanguard of our society or of our culture has taken his goodbye from Christianity. So both things are present, and the Enlightenment, well, we never became completely enlightened, of course. Maybe that's not a bad thing either. So this old legacy remains. It's not like an ongoing story. Okay, the Enlightenment comes, Christianity is swept away, and now we are living in an enlightened age. No, this story continues. This story of secularization, it's still going on. And of course, we have the problem here that we are using like this word enlightenment, which already suggests that that the Enlightenment is the good way to think. And I will not hesitate to say personally, in many ways, I prefer the enlightened way of thinking over like the traditional, whatever that may be, Christian way. Yeah, but still, it's a big assumption to say things like this. Of course, that that we should be enlightened or are not enlightened yet, because we do not follow the Enlightenment in all aspects of our culture. That's maybe where the Romantics come into play. When are we going to talk about the Romantics, James?
I thought this would come up because this is one of the biggest sections in the book. Actually, is on the Romantic poets, on I believe most largely kind of Byron and Shelley, and a lot of the Romantic poets they take very, very large amounts of their inspiration from the imagery and symbolism of Satan. This is beyond mischief, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not. No, it's not just. Yeah, it's not just an emoticon they're doing here. No, and this was actually one of the main points I wanted to make in my book, because we have been talking about this traditional polemical use of Satanism, of the trope of Satanism. So talking about others who might do Satanism and a certain construct of what this Satanism would be, which is of course a negative concept. But as our listeners, and we are well aware, there are Satanists today who are actually practicing this religion, and well, they're not like the conspiracy people that Christian imagination made of Satanists. It's just like I tend to say a very ordinary modern religion, actually. So how did this come about? And the central point of one of the central points of my books is that the Romantic Satanists were like crucial in this evolution. And why do I think this? First of all, they in a way they readopted Satan, but now as a mainly positive symbol, because they were children of the Enlightenment in many ways. We're talking about a group of Romantic authors who are not into Christianity, but more anti-Christian in some way or another. or at least opposed to what we may call established Christianity, because we have, of course, Blake also, and he would consider himself the only true Christian maybe in England. You can already sense this history is more complicated than we maybe could possibly do justice in this short conversation. But anyhow, these romantics start to adopt this symbol of Satan as a positive symbol, as a symbol of like rebellion against Christianity and rebellion against autocratic rule. It's a very political story too. They are mostly political radicals in favor of democratic reform, in favor of revolution sometimes. We have just had the French Revolution, so this is the thing in European history then. And the major difference with the Enlightenment is that they actually embrace this symbolism, that they embrace this religious symbolism. Well, the Enlightenment would say, well, okay, this is also like, of course, the Enlightenment was also more diverse than we can discuss here. But in general, they would say they would prefer reason to make a reasonable deduction, and so they hadn't much use for a symbol like Satan. And even if they were talking about God, they would talk about like an abstract deity, like deism, more like a philosophical category, not like a symbolic thing that has like imaginative power. But the Romantics, they were very much into this use of symbolism, and this is for me, this was a very difficult thing to understand. It's a very vital thing. What they were actually doing here, because I was raised in like a traditional literal religion. What the Bible says is true, and so I would. If you mention Satan or you mention God, you believe they are literally there. But these romantic Satanists, they talk about Satan a lot, but I don't think any one of them believed there was a real Satan. Possibly with the exception of Blake, but Blake is a special case anyhow. But still, they use this concept, and this concept was not just like a trope in their poetry that you can read and then put away, or just like an embellishment. It was like a vital symbol to express this important thing, important part of their worldview, their ideology. So it was like a symbol or a set of symbols to express their view on the universe, and that's why I consider this like a religious venture. And of course, this poetry anyway was not just like for entertainment. This was like a serious attempt to like create a new mythology for the West, not like Northrop Frye already wrote a long time ago, not a closed mythology, a belief system you have to follow and believe literally, but like an open mythology that you can use to express what your view of the world. And in this view of the world, like God mostly became a cipher for autocratic rule, for traditional rule, and Satan became a cipher, a symbol for a new individualism, for freedom, for liberation. And that started like a train of tradition, of textual tradition mostly, that I think in the end resulted in the actual practice of modern Satanism. So
the Romantics then were a sort of a religious form of rebellion. The sort of one of the first gasps of fresh air after the sort of the stifling atmosphere of the Enlightenment.
Well, I don't know if you can call the Enlightenment stifling. doesn't feel like stifling to me. But it was a return of this. I think probably is just a dimension of our human existence or tendency to make religion, and I don't mean like it has to be organized, established religion, but like develop symbolic ways to look at the world. And they restarted this, yes. They readopted this way to use symbolism, but in a different way than Christianity had done and other religions had done before the Enlightenment. This is what I explained about this open mythology. So it's more consciously self-constructed, with some of these authors more than others, and it was not meant as a dogmatic, literal religion, but as a creative project also. But still, it was serious. It was not just entertainment, just literature. If you can speak of something like this, just literature. Maybe literature, serious literature is always an attempt to define a worldview, implicitly or explicitly.
Yeah, and also you mentioned in the book, as we're talking about this form of rebellion, that actually, strangely, and this is one of the bits that really surprised me, is the idea of Satan is picked up as a device by Proudhon and Bakunin. So there's this anarchic undercurrent with regards to politics, and Satan begins to sort of become identified with liberty and freedom, which is sort of the political aspect of the romantic. The other side from the romantics, this is the political side of things.
Yes, well, it's even difficult to call this the other side. And by the way, you should mention Godwin, of course, the father of modern anarchism, who might have started this whole redefinition of Satan from Milton by just like a side remark in one of his books. So there's a big tradition. Well, big tradition. There's a clear tradition in this 19th century anarchism to use Satan as this symbol of liberation. But with the romantic Satanism, you cannot really separate the religious and the political dimension, actually. It's like, well, the archetypical events of a revolution in Europe was, of course, that was the French Revolution, this revolt against the absolute autocratic king, and like in this poetry about Satanism, about Satan, not about Satanism, about Satan, God becomes like a symbol for the autocratic king, but the autocratic king can also be a symbol of God. So this religious and political symbolism, this religious and political dimension, they're completely interrelated, and their revolt against Christianity was also partly a political thing, because we're speaking about like Byron, Shelley, and we're speaking about the time of the reaction after the French Revolution, when actually autocratic kings regained control of most of Europe for a while, and the reaction was invoked. So it was a period when God seemed to have the upper hand, to rephrase it in their own terms. And that's another reason why this Lucifer, this Satan from like the Milton epic, was so powerful a symbol, because actually if you read Paradise Lost by Milton, Satan is, of course, his case is lost. His cause is lost. He will lose in the end, but still he keeps opposing God, just the sense of independence. And that was, they must have felt their own situation like this, like desperate opposition against the powers that be, and it seemed to be the most powerful, the autocratic rulers. well, they are damned in hell, and will probably never gain the upper hand. But still see it as their duty, duty of honor to oppose this autocratism. So then, this Miltonic Satan will be a very powerful symbol to adopt, where you can relate to, like, almost personally, probably.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, in the end, democracy, won the battle, at least in the West, and for as long as we are speaking now. So, but they couldn't know this. So, and in the anarchistic tradition, there's this. Well, they adopt this symbolism and they extend on it. But of course, Proudhon and Bakunin, they didn't believe in a literal Satan. It's even more symbolic than with the Romantic Satanists. And with a writer like Bakunin, it's almost only a rhetoric tool. Actually, it's not so rich as with the Romantic Satanists.
Mm-hmm. And then this, as we're sort of now we're getting closer to contemporary history here, the sort of the latest iteration which has been sort of formally structured and we can understand it as something now is, of course, Anton LaVey and also in part Aleister Crowley, but I don't think as much. I mean, he had his own thing going on with Thelema, but Anton LaVey, so this is 60s and 70s, I believe. Why do you think this sudden resurgence came back? Do you think it was the free love sort of atmosphere that brought it back, this atmosphere of rebellion?
Well, yes, but behind this, I suppose, free love atmosphere, the hippie time was much more important. I think a new wave of secularization hitting Western culture and American culture, American society, because these waves of interest in Satanism, I think if you would put them in a graph, as far as it's possible, you would see nice correspondence with the historical waves of secularization we have had in the West. The first one occurring after the French Revolution, so that's where we see the Romantic Satanists somewhere coming up. More secularization at the end of the 19th century, and a new wave of secularization actually in the 60s. Well, we in the West, we get more affluent, get more rich. We don't need the church so more. We don't need charity. We get more education. So there's new secularization coming up, and secularization in practice always means not so much that there's less religion, but there are more forms of religion, more variants of religion. And one of these variants, of course, was LaVeyan Satanism, which is very clearly a reaction against Christianity, of course, against certain dogmatic Christianity. So that's what I would say, as far as we can tell, things like this. That the reason was that this occurred in the 60s. Because Anton LaVey himself, as I described in my book, he was not so fond of this hippie revolution. He was a different kind of man. He was not into peace and love and things like this. LaVeyan Satanism isn't, of course, it's more a fierce thing, more Nietzschean thing of kind of thing. So these Satanists and these hippies, it would mix well in practice, probably.
Okay. One of the questions you wanted me to ask, and I'm wondering why this is kind of important, is what's your viewpoint on what should be done with Satanist research? Because when I was looking into this, there's very few, perhaps I didn't look far enough, but there's very few books which are presenting an overarching, non-biased history of Satanism, or Satanism in a non-biased way, and yours is one of the few. So what do you think should be done in the research?
First of all, maybe you're not completely up to date with like academic literature, because there's actually been done a lot in the last few decades, I would say. There's Peterson's Invention of Satanism. I've been to conferences about the history of Satanism, or about Satanism, I would say, in general. One in Trondheim, where I was, and one in Sweden, which I couldn't attend. There's the new book of Massimo Intervigne, which appeared almost at the same time as mine, actually. So he's kind of my direct competition here. Which is also, Intervigne and I, we differ on many points. We have different views on many aspects of the history of Satanism, but it's certainly a very good book in an academic sense, very impartial look at Satanism. There's the work of Per Faxneld, of course. So there's much going on. And
okay, excuse my ignorance on that.
Oh, there's no problem. But and actually, surprisingly much, if you take into account how many Satanists there are actually around in the world, which we actually don't know. We don't know how many people are Satanists now, but like the estimates range between 10,000 and 100,000. So it's not actually, I used to be in a very small Calvinist church denomination in the Netherlands, and they actually had more members than the whole religion of Satanism has. So it's a small religion, yes. But of course it's a religion that fascinates. Just because they adopt this figure of Satan, which we still tend to associate with evil and with all kinds of dark things like orgies and sacrifices, which actually were invented by the Christian imagination. So, there are a few things I can say about this. Because one thing that surprised me when I was like on this conference in Trondheim already more than 10 years ago, I was actually at this. I did my research on Satanism at a faculty of Catholic theology in the Netherlands, the only faculty of Catholic theology actually acknowledged by the Vatican. When you talk with church historians, etc., historians of the Christian church, mostly they are in some way or other connected with Christianity, mostly because they are Christians themselves. And I was surprised to find a bit of the same thing actually in the academic world around Satanism. My rough guess would be that almost 50% of these academics are involved in some kind of, maybe not Satanism, but at least what they call left-hand spirituality. So it's actually the same as with Christian theology here, which is in itself shouldn't be a trouble. It shouldn't be a problem. It's logical to do research into your own roots, so to say. But sometimes you see that this results in certain imbalances, historically speaking, because Satanism, as we know it now, as a practice religion, mostly descends from LaVeyan Satanism, which is a very particular brand of Satanism, for instance, political, more of a right-wing variant, very, explicit anti-Christian in its outlook, and very antinomial in its outlook, and very Nietzschean. Some current groups of Satanism oppose LaVeyan Satanism and other others embrace it, but they all, they all deal in some way with this framework. And sometimes even in definition of Satanism, you can see this current framework returning with academics even, that they tend to define like historical Satanism with terms that actually are described LaVeyan Satanism. And the funny thing is, before the 20th century, Satanism could be a very different thing from LaVeyan Satanism. I think 80% of the historical occurrences, of which we can, with some reason, call Satanism or partly Satanism, were like syncretism actually, and mostly this syncretism was a syncretism between Satanism and Christianity, which is a very different thing than LaVeyan Satanism, with a reaction on Christianity, but certainly not a syncretism between Christianity and Satanism. If we look at the Process, another partly Satanist group in the 60s, they also have like Jehovah, like Christ. If you look at Nakloska in the 30s with the Temple of Satan, so you have the Holy Spirit, some kind of Hegel-like Godhead. So if you look at Eliphas Levi, who was not a Satanist but very important for the development of Satanism, he considered himself a Roman Catholic with his own very particular definition of Roman Catholicism, I must say, but still. And he was trying to reach the Holy Spirit, so to say. Many more of these examples I could give. If we go to 17th century Satanism, it's a whole different story, and also this syncretism with Christianity. So this is a completely different way of experiencing, of forming, of developing your Satanism, and not so much the longer we go back in history, the less this Satanism tends to be like an ideological standoff with Christianity. We get into a different territory here, far more, a territory in which like supernatural realities are much more taken for granted. What was I trying to say? This thing is like a bit, it's sometimes a bit swept on the carpet, not by purpose, but these are other realities about the history of Satanism where that are not so popular, maybe, with like academics who currently study Satanism.
I was just going to say, if there's anything you'd like to add that you feel that's crucial that we've missed out.
We could add many things. But I don't know what kind of people will be listening to this podcast. But if there are any people who are considering to get into academic research and to religious history, and maybe considering Satanism, especially in the United States, I would say there's a lot of opportunity here, a lot of work to do. Because my book, it was already a miracle that I could write such a broad history as this in current academia. But it's my real focus. I had to pick a focus, and my real focus is clearly on the 19th century. But also in the 20th century, there's loads of work to do. For instance, for LaVeyan Satanism. My chapters about the 20th century, they are like centered on the biography of Anton LaVey, but if you see my sources, I use like the published sources, the sources published by the Temple of Set founder. I use like the books Anton LaVey wrote, but there must be many more like really primary sources, like in America, in the archives of the Church of Satan, maybe in private archives. I think this is the moment for somebody there to take up this challenge and really write this academic biography of Anton LaVey, for instance, which is he's a very interesting person in his own right. I mean, the founder of the first, well, maybe not the first, but the first really tradition-setting church of Satanism. Why has nobody written a decent biography of this man? And and that's a funny thing that as I said, there are surprisingly many academics currently studying Satanism. Many of them are studying Satanism as it's currently practiced, more in the field of religious studies. And most of them, they know, of course, they have some expertise on the history of Satanism, but let's say the experts on the early history of Satanism would be Massimo Trovini, which is an Italian based in Turin. Would be maybe me. I'm Dutch, so now I'm in Poland. And it would be Per Faxneld, who's in Sweden. So these are all Europeans. Much of this history in the 20th century is, of course, it's American history. So I'm still wondering and waiting for this American historian to take up this challenge and really write something on Anton LaVey.
It would certainly be interesting.
It's a golden opportunity, just waiting for somebody to do it. As there are many aspects of history of Satanism which are surprisingly under researched. If you go to the 19th century, the whole hotbed of alternative religions that in the end, for instance, result in somebody like Elizabeth Levy, the so-called father of occultism. I think I have this hunch that there's more with Lucifer going on there than we know now. Mm-hmm. For instance, Simonism, also one of these alternative religions. And there could be, maybe there's nothing, maybe there's something, but certainly there could be an interesting research done here.
Okay, so anyone listening, take up the torch and continue the research.
Take up the torch, yes, and especially research into primary sources. There's a lot to do in this field.
So, so Ruben, is there anything that you're currently working on? Any projects which will be, or is all your current work in Dutch? We do have a few Dutch listeners. So,
currently I'm more into photography. Actually, I don't know if this fits your program or fits your podcast. And I'm working now on a series on Poznan, actually, in Poland, where I'm now, and actually was just writing a proposal for a project I already started on nature dioramas. So that's a completely different branch of creativity. But no, I'm not really into academic research anymore. I must say this may be a nice way to close the conversation. After doing 7 years research on Satanism, and this surprisingly this history with surprisingly broad aspects and surprisingly intertwined with Western history, I still became a bit tired. The thing I became most tired of was the fact that, in a way, I was still studying Christianity. Actually, in this way, it was even though Satanism historically is a reaction on Christianity, and I was feeling that I was still filling my life by that they were still involved with Christianity in this way, and well, I thought this had to end. And for me, in my personal history, this was already a thing long from the past. But I was in danger of becoming an academic. Working on Satanism, and in this way on Christianity actually for the rest of my life. So that's why I decided not to pursue the study of Satanism anymore, because it felt too Christian for me. I don't know. I hope I'm offending any Satanist listeners on this moment. But yeah, this was how I personally felt about it. Yes, how it felt for me. It remains a fascinating subject, but of course it was my job, so it was. Let's say at least 40 hours a week that I was working with this. I'm doing well. As I said, it took me 7 years. Depends on how you count. After 7 years, I was aching for a more social way to fill my time instead of reading books and going to the computer and typing a new book based on all the books I read, which was a nice intellectual adventure. But if this is your occupation 5 days a week at least, then it might not be healthy.
No, it's definitely not.
No, you can imagine probably. So I try to pick up teaching and more creative ways to express myself. It's actually involved me going out. So that's what happened with me. But still very happy this book came out, and it's very funny to see what happens with this book actually. It's now the reading list of some Satanist organizations actually. And it's I cannot praise the book, of course, but it's generally well received, and I really liked it. What I like most when people compliment it, like the style. English is not my native language, as you can hear, so it was very. I try to write not only like an academic book, but also a book that was entertaining in a literary way. Really tell this story, not just listing the facts, but tell the story, because this is actually a very wonderful story. It's already this story of Christianity. It's like crazy. There's this somewhere there in the Middle East. There's this guru who get crucified, and then we have a world religion. This is already an amazing story, maybe even more amazing than the history of Satanism. But the history of Satanism is also pretty interesting, very unique. That the society is Christian, and suddenly the society decides, we swap our religion, we swap our worldview, and part of this society actually decides to, we skip this God, and we adopt the old symbol of evil, and we're gonna venerate this as a source of good, or as a symbol for what's good, what we consider good in life. So it's amazing history, and that's also, of course, part of its enduring fascination.
Yeah, it is a fantastic book, and I love the start as well, and I think it's extremely well written and extremely well researched as well. Yeah, it's surprising that it's not your native language, to be honest. But Ruben Van Luijk, it's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for coming on.
My pleasure again.